I'm Julie Herndon, and I'm an Oakland-based composer, performer, and sound artist. And I'm going to read some excerpts from my article, Embodied Composition, Composing the Body with Sound, which will be published with Leonardo Music Journal later this year. As a composer, I constantly search for ways to communicate the embodied process of sound making. I preserve it through recording, relay it with images, describe it with notation, and explain it verbally. My goal here is to name core attributes of this practice of embodied composition, one that uses the idiosyncrasies and intelligences of the body as musical material. I'll describe this creative process based on my own experience and illustrate it with examples by other composers. Embodied composition is the practice of organizing sound in relation to the body and its internal and external experiences. This includes its intuitive and corporeal capacity to create, remember, and respond to the environment. A definition of this practice relies on conceptions of the music-making body from phenomenology, embodied music cognition, and ecological perception. It starts by acknowledging the insightful and intelligent capacities of the body. Merleau-Ponty defines the phenomenological body as one that ensures metamorphosis. It transforms ideas into things. It remembers, inhabits, and transforms experience within a musical environment, like an organist who settles into the organ as one settles into a house. Embodied composition recognizes that all musical experiences are mediated by the body. In the words of Jonathan D'Souza, musical knowledge is not grounded in bodies alone, but in an interplay of techniques and technologies. Musical creativity is in fact saturated by ecological, social, cultural, and technological mediations. This web between corporeal senses and the environment results in a model of ecological perception in which every kind of knowing rests upon or involves a perceptual relationship with the environment. Embodied composition seeks to craft these relationships consciously as material, rather than subconscious influences or even undesirable byproducts. It poses the question, in Gibson's terms, what affordances does the body offer the act of composition? What does it provide the composer? There are three primary affordances of the sounding body, which I will call elements of embodied composition. First is the ability to sound quickly and precisely, creating vibrations with or without the help of an external object. The most pervasive form of this is the voice, the body's primary form of audible communication. Second is gesture, movement that can be in tandem but not necessarily coupled with sound production. Last is a physiological creative state where ideas emerge and are realized. I'll describe each of these in more detail. The voice is a direct and physical means of sonic expression. Vocalizing is heard within the womb and commences immediately at birth as the primary form of communication. It follows that an embodied compositional method may involve spontaneous vocalizations or be perpetuated by oral tradition as a means of accessing sonic material. Many of its qualities can be transposed to an instrument. As Barth writes, "The grain is the body in the voice as it sings, the hand as it writes, the limb as it performs." In the case studies that follow, voice is the primary instrument. But while the voice is essential to embodied composition because of its pervasive immediacy, it illustrates ideas that can also be applied to an instrumental voice. Gesture. Sound is movement, from the motion which initiates vibrations to the reflections through the space in which it resounds. Choreography and dance notation provide rich examples of gestural movement as compositional material, including Laban notation and the open scores of Debrehay and Simone Forti, to name only a few. Embodied electronic instrument design, such as the gesture controllers I will mention, enables physical interactions with sound that are not bound by acoustics. This opens a discussion beyond the metaphorical definition of the musical gesture to the concrete of how a sound is initiated. Creative state. This state is marked by a lack of impedance between ideas and action. Also called flow, it unites awareness and presence, a notion found in many Buddhist meditation techniques. The act of composing, while it includes activities like listening and sounding, is rooted in this imaginative and focused realm. As I will show, a self-aware enaction of this state can also appear in and as the piece itself. While all composers bring something of their embodied experience into music, not all choose to do so consciously, and not all use those experiences as musical material. To do so is to consider the body not only in composition, but as composition. Donna Haraway calls this situated creativity sympoiesis. She says it means making with. Nothing makes itself. Nothing is really autopoetic or self-organizing. Embodied composition makes use of these sympoetic relationships. My interest in embodied composition originates in my own creative practice. I harvest material with my sounding body, develop it in community with others, and participate in assemblages which may house, order, and perpetuate those utterances. I follow a similar process here. I've outlined a definition of embodied composition from my own experience. And I'll now give examples from conversations with composers working with a similar set of priorities. Pamela Z and Cassandra Miller both highlight a unique combination of the voice, gesture, and creative state. These composers are not anomalies, but rather representative examples of a set of priorities. Z uses embodied interfaces to map sound to gesture, and Miller externalizes internal states in concert. Despite their aesthetic differences, they both self-define as composers, though not exclusively, work with all three of the aforementioned elements of voice, gesture, and creative state, and have international reputations that enable a certain depth of scale and breadth of collaboration. It seems appropriate that writing on a co-creative process would itself follow a sympoetic journey. So I engaged with each artist in conversations that challenged and focused my own beliefs. Pamela Z uses custom gesture-controlled instruments to augment her voice and demonstrate her creative process. She uses sampling and delays to convert ephemeral vocalizations into manipulatable signal. She crafts a shoreline between the ungraspable and the concrete that D'Souza describes, saying, "My voice originates inside my body. I can neither grasp it nor see it. As my voice resounds outside of me, it may sometimes be experienced as a kind of object." Z's wearable sensor instruments originated with the body synth and now include the Uta, Mira, and Mim, made by Donald Swearingen in a close collaboration. They're situated among a growing number of artists working with gesture controllers, including Letitia Sonami's Lady's Glove, Michael Weiswich, the Hands, or Imogen Heap's more commercial Mimu gloves. Distinctively, these instruments are an extension of her voice and are communicative in nature, telling a story of the history of the sound or demonstrating the piece itself. For example, in Breathing, which she wrote in 2013, Z begins with self-narration. "I was breathing." She then punctuates this narrative with movements that trigger interruptions, granulation, and distort her speech. And the glitches she triggers are at times jerky or rough, but in a performance, she positions these processes as within her control, not happening to her, but by her. And this sense of agency is intensified when she steps away from the microphone and sings unamplified, delineating her live acoustic voice from its processed recordings.
Was breathing, I was breathing, I'm breathing, I was breathing, I was, I'm breathing, I was breathing, I was.
Z also uses gesture to demonstrate sound in space. At times, her hands seem to pull the sound away from her as she sings, even before the audio processing begins. The effect is a counterpoint of implication. In some cases, her gestures are larger than life, directing immediate sonic results. In others, they are strictly expressive and invite a listener to imagine their effect. The ambiguity between these two sorts of movements creates a performance space in which a listener must holistically attend to their significance and sonic implications. Z's performances invite the audience to be engrossed in her creative process. Her presence becomes a guide, signaling the listener, directing attention, and communicating narrative. Like much of embodied composition, it capitalizes on a sense of liveness by developing material audiovisually in space. It requires a multimodal listening that Steph Sarasso defines as attending to the sensory, contextual, and material aspects of a sonic event, the ecological relationship among sounds, bodies, environments, and materials. Cassandra Miller displays the development and lineage of her creative practice. Her recent collaborations, such as So Close in 2016 with Sylvia Djerassi and the Tracery Project in 2018 with Juliet Fraser, begin by inviting the performer into a focused exploration of physical and mental states. The incubation process is then recorded and recreated for listeners to witness and enter empathetically. This work marks an important component of embodied composition in its attention to the transformative effects of translation and transcription, the path between source and product. Miller and Fraser expose the lineage of their meditative practice in tracery, attending to a task. They mimic as closely as possible the text from Robert Ashley's interview with Pauline Oliveros in Music with Roots in the Ether from 1985. Miller calls this process transformative mimicry, a method which relies on and delights in concentrated yet imperfect imitation. In performance, Fraser mimics the esthetician from the video, while layers of their past recorded imitations play back around her. By prescribing this focus, Miller and Fraser create the same state of no intention that Oliveros speaks of in the film. Engrossed in the moment as a body attending to a task. Both Miller and Oliveros seek to achieve this state not only in performance but as performance, but their aim is quite different. While Oliveros effectively erodes the performer-audience binary, Miller and Fraser keep it intact. If Oliveros attempts to dissolve the boundary between inner and outer, they display it.
So I was not to know how I was to make the sounds. I knew things about the assemblers and that respect. But at the same time, I had myself making intentional sounds. And so intending to sound kind of music at that time.
Miller's work with meditative states is used as a means of bypassing cognitive processes to access unfiltered, improvised material. She calls her method of vocal mimicry automatic singing and links it with similar practices used by Oliveros in pieces such as Rose Mountain Slow Runner, written in 1979. Her performance of process also bears resemblance to pieces by Alvin Lucier, most notably Music for Solo Performer from 1982. However, rather than sonify a meditation itself, she uses it as a means of prompting improvisation. Her display of origin and process centers on interpersonal interactions and creates a translucent performance space, which invites the listener as an almost voyeuristic observer. Embodied composition uses collaboration, gestural implementation, and shared body-mind states to shape and structure sound. It occurs in community and evolves in conversation. It establishes unique relationships between sound and movement that build on internal and external awareness. It exposes its roots and affirms that a shared narrative can deepen a sense of connectedness. Can embodied composition be cultivated online, digitalized at a distance? To do so, it must become an active inquiry into the contact points between the body and that which perpetuates its utterances. It must create with, rather than in spite of, evolving musical ecologies. It must locate the body in its mediated exchanges and ask, how is the voice conveyed in this correspondence? How does the body move with this material? How do I facilitate a deeper connection with the internal states of those involved? Residing in those questions is a host of possibilities for using the physicality of the sounding body to productively interweave, interface, and interfere with sound and its technologies.